Hello, my name is Shane. Today I'm speaking with Bill Cordell for Orlando Memory during the Zora Neale Hurston Festival in Eatonville, Florida. The date is Saturday, January 28th. Hello, Mr. Cordell. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Can you tell us where and when you were born, approximately, if you'd like?
Sure. I was born in Oak Park, Illinois, on the 30th day of October, 1950.
That's very specific. And tell us, when did you come to the Central Florida area?
Well, we moved to Florida when I was very young. I was about 4 years old, and we settled on the west coast of Florida, Venice, Florida, which is south of Sarasota. And that's where I grew up. I went to high school, or elementary and middle school and high school there. And then I went to the University of South Florida before leaving. I went to the Air Force and traveled around and spent a lot of time in Chicago, and then moved back after I had started my vocation, which was I wanted to be an actor. So I worked in Chicago and did a lot of films and commercials and voiceovers. And then I said, one day while I was on the freezing cold platform of an L, waiting for, like in February, and hadn't seen zero for about 2 months. I mean, it was just constantly below zero every single day. I said, this is so cold. And I remember some guys saying, when I retire, I'm going to move to Florida. And I said, wait a minute. I'm from Florida. I got property in Florida. What am I doing here? So, and the business, of film and whatnot was starting to blossom in Florida. So I came down and hooked up with some agents here and started doing film and whatever was available here in Florida back in 1980s when I moved back to Florida. And then once we moved, I started back in Venice, and then I went down to Miami because that's where the majority of the work was. And then they had, I don't know if you remember, the Hollywood East promotion, and they actually put the film facilities at Universal and at MGM Studios, and they were working facilities, working studios. And at that time, my wife and I made the decision to move to Central Florida to take advantage of that. So, I worked on all the shows, Superboy, Swamp Thing, gosh, I can't think of all of them. And a lot of the movies that came through town, like Ernest Saves Christmas and My Girl and Parenthood, all those kind of things. So I get to work on, in some capacity, with a lot of those, and a lot of commercials. Because, being in Florida, all the advertising agencies up in Chicago and New York and Detroit, they're always looking for time down, so they'd come down into Florida to get out of the cold, essentially. So they always drew a palm tree in the what do you call it, the storyboard. And so at any rate, they would come down, and I worked on hundreds of commercials here because of that reason, and because Florida was starting to blossom, and just the whole industry was picking up. Got to work on Miami Vice down in Miami, and a lot of the movies that came down through there as well.
Do you have a favorite shoot that you did, or one that stands out in your memory as especially interesting?
Well, the pat answer was always the one that I was working on at the time, because that meant I was working. In that business, you always wanted to be working. Well, I got to, for a long time there, I was the dad. And I was always the dad, or I always ended up working with kids or animals, which they say you should never do. You should never work with. But I became very adept at it, I guess. And quite often I'd have to work with animals. And I guess one of the most interesting shoots was when Zephyr Hills Water was doing commercials for their water, and they had a series of where the little lady would drive around the state of Florida and go talking to people about how thirsty they were. And so I was an alligator farmer. So I had an alligator farm, and she'd go, farming? No, there's thirsty work. And so she pulls her convertible car into the alligator farm, and there I am, hey, gator, and and when I went to audition I auditioned, and I tried to look like a gator farmer, and had overalls on, and they bought it. They thought I looked pretty much like the character they wanted. So then they said, well,
but not a guy from Illinois.
Right.
Yeah.
So then they asked, well, I drew upon all my experiences in Florida. And so they said, well, do you have any problems working with alligators? And I'm thinking, well, no. I mean, they're going to be, I figured we're going to do it over at Gatorland or something like that, even though the audition was down in Miami. And they said, oh, okay. And I said, well, as long as you got, some people that can handle them, because, I'm not a gator farmer, but I can look like one. So anyway, okay. So when I got called to do the shoot, we were doing it out in the middle of the Miccosukee Reservation. We're out there in the middle of the Everglades. That's where the call was. And I showed up, and I'm going, well, what? And they literally had some Miccosukee Indians wrestle some gators out of the water, because their mindset was, if we use gators that are too used to humans, that wouldn't be good. So we want gators that are afraid. So we'll get them out. And these were like 6-7 foot gators that they had the handler sitting on with their hands over their eyes. Or actually, they had a piece of duct tape over their eyes, and they had their hands over their mouths. And then when the director said action, we were supposed to do the bit, she'd come in and go, have you ever tried Zephyr Hills? And I look at her like surprised and go, no, what are you doing here? And she goes, well, here, try some of this. And I go, I drink it. And I go, oh, that's great. But, the gators walk, and they're walking all along around us, supposedly. So when the director yelled action, he said, we're not going to be able to do this too many times, So here we are. And I got a big stick, so I'm pretty well. But the woman, she's like 80 years old, and she can't see very well. And the gator handlers are sitting, there's 3 of them, sitting on the gators. They jump off when they yell action. They rip off the duct tape, and they get out of the shot. And then the gators get up, and they figured they just turn around and go back in the water. Well, they didn't. They start walking around, but the director loved. But, I'm there going, gator, gator, gator. So anyway, that's the kind of stuff that you never know what you're going to run into. Fortunately, neither of us were hurt, and it became a very successful commercial. It was shown quite a bit.
Wow.
So anyway, that's probably more than you want to hear.
So you're a storyteller for that library.
I am.
How did you end up with that?
Well, as an actor, you're a natural storyteller. I mean, you use your face, you use your body, your voice to tell a story. And it actually came when my youngest daughter, was going to school, and I went in, like I did for my older daughter. I'd tell stories or read stories to the children. And then Screen Actors Guild, I'm a member of Screen Actors Guild, and I was also on the national board. And I was out at a meeting in Los Angeles one day, and I got to meet Barbara Bain of Mission Impossible fame, and she started a program called Book Pals, Performing Artists for Literacy in Schools. And so actors would go into schools, at-risk schools primarily, and tell stories or read stories to children, try and get them interested in books by their reading, because as an actor, you're kind of a natural ham or whatever, and kind of make it interesting. So we would do that. We would read stories, and when I was there, I said, we need to have that in Florida. So when I came back, another actor and I, Dan Fitzgerald, he was down in Miami, we pressed for it, and they got a coordinator who's Natalie Rogers, and they put together Book Pals here in Florida. And so I've been doing that ever since, going to schools and reading to children. I do it, at least once or twice a week, and amass like a couple hundred hours each year, telling stories or reading stories to children. And then it just became a natural jump, I guess, when the library started looking for part-time storytellers to fill in, and I came in, and I was the first part-time storyteller they hired back, about 7 years ago, and I've been doing the programs for the library, which I find it so rewarding to be able to tell a story to children and have them get excited to maybe read the books or, hear the stories, and just it gets. I don't know. Like I say, it's just I find it very rewarding, and far more rewarding than when I was constantly, building my career, so to speak. It was a natural fit. So I've been doing it for the past 7 years and finding a lot of satisfaction doing it.
Today we are at the Zora Neale Hurston Festival in Edenville.
Yeah.
And how many years have you come to the festival?
I've been here since I've been telling stories for the library. So they've asked me to come here and do stories during the weekend, one point or another, and so it's been about 7 years.
And what has it been like to come up with the years and the last couple of years, and be a storyteller here?
Well, it's not an easy thing to do because there's a lot of music and there's a lot of distractions and people are coming and going. But they'll look over and we got a little thing set up, storytelling with Mr. Bill. Some will come over. Sometimes I have to go out. I use a puppet or whatever to try and intrigue people, and they come over. And then I share a book or a story and just try to let them know about the heritage, because Zora Neale Hurston is all about storytelling. She was a folklorist. She traveled around. She collected stories. She took all the oral traditions of the people along the Gulf course and the Gulf Coast and the Caribbean, and she put those in books, and it kept the tradition alive. So I like to tell some of those stories, like why dog hates cat, or how porpoise got his tail, or any of those stories, to try and keep that tradition alive and also get people excited about Zora Neale Hurston, who's not only a folklorist, but was a wonderful playwright and a wonderful author and an anthropologist, and is an incredible human being. So once they hear the stories, then it becomes a little more real, I think, for them about who Zora is and the fact that she lived here, and this was where she started primarily, as all the things she learned and some of the stories she would hear on these very streets,
And people connect with that.
Yeah, a lot of people do, particularly the older people. They come by, and the parents, and then the children, of course, just get excited, I think, to hear the stories.
Well, Mr. Bill, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It was great to talk to you.
It's a pleasure.